Hello mathematicians. Today's video is on solving one-step equations using multiplication and division. So we learned recently how to solve one-step equations using addition and subtraction, and now we're going to talk about how to do that with multiplication and division. So our objective is students will be able to solve one-step equations with multiplication and division. Okay, so before we even get into how to solve those, the first thing I want to talk about is different ways we see multiplication, especially with fractions. So right now, I want to talk about different ways that we can write fractions with variables. So right here we have something like 2 over 3x. Now remember, when the 2 over 3, the fraction, okay, that's called the coefficient, when it's touching x right there, that means that we have multiplication happening right there. When a coefficient is touching a variable, that means multiplication. Right now, we have 2 over 3x. We could rewrite this, though, as 2x over 3. Okay, 2x over 3. Rewriting it that way allows us to move the x around. Okay? Another way of us writing 3x over 5 might be 3 over 5x. Okay, in this instant, I pulled the fraction out. Okay, in example 1, we put x back into the fraction. Example 2, we pulled the fraction out. Now, in something like 3, we want to pull the variable out of the fraction. Now, I'm going to kind of zoom in on this so you can really see it. Okay. In something like 3, this variable right now is by itself. If we look at our example 2 over here, the coefficient in front of x was a 3. But on this one, there is no coefficient in front of n. And that is because there's a 1 there that's hidden. So whenever you see a variable by itself, we want to go ahead and put a 1 in front of it. That means that there's a 1 there. This is a hidden 1. This is a hidden 1. It's hidden. You can't see it, so you're going to have to put it in. So if I want to pull a fraction out of n over 4, my fraction I'd pull out would be 1/4 n. Right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. Alright, so let's keep going. How might we write something like 12 as a fraction? Well, 12 is just a number. There's no variable there. But we could rewrite it as a fraction. Any number can be written as a fraction if we put it over 1. So I'll give you a couple more examples. Oops, didn't mean to make that. Okay, something like 1/5 k. How might we write that as a fraction? Okay, now k's have been already separated from the fraction. We're going to put k back into the fraction. So I might say 1k over 5. Now, just kind of like our example up here, number 3, where we had 1/4 n. Okay, we could, if we wanted to, write this as just k over 5. Okay, that 1 is hidden, but we could see it or we could hide it again, k over 5. Okay, 3 more examples. We have negative x over 7, right? How could we rewrite that as a fraction? We're going to keep that negative. Remember that there's a hidden 1 in front of the x, so we could have had a negative 1x over 7. Okay, I just rewrote that with a 1. Or, if I wanted to pull out a fraction, I could have 1 over 7x, and I'm going to pull the fraction out in front. Alright, let's do 2 more examples. Okay, in this example, our x is already with the 3 on top, the numerator. So I'm going to pull a fraction out of that. I'm going to pull out negative 3/6 x, pull the fraction out. Now, some of you should look at negative 3 over 6 and notice, can I simplify that? So if we type into our calculator 3 over 6 as a fraction, it's going to reduce to 1/2. So we should check that we can reduce that. So negative 1/2 x. And then lastly, a is all by itself, but we could rewrite this as a fraction by putting a over 1. Okay, I want you to do a little bit of practice rewriting things as fractions, so I want you to go ahead and pause the video, rewrite each of these examples in a different way. So take however it's written, and I want you to either pull the fraction out from the variable or pull the variable back into the fraction. So go ahead and pause the video and press play when you're ready. Alright, here are your answers. Go ahead and check your answers. Pause the video if you need to, and then we're going to keep going. Okay, now we're getting into what one-step multiplication and division is actually going to look like. So before we go over that, we've talked about this word before, this word inverse. I want you to think in your head right now, what does the word inverse mean? Okay, you should have thought, okay, inverse, that means the opposite. And when we're talking about finding the inverse of something, an operation, we're talking about inverse operations. So we've learned this before. The inverse of addition is going to be subtraction. The inverse of subtraction is going to be addition. We did that in our previous objective. The inverse of multiplication is going to be new to us, and the inverse of multiplication is going to be division. Similarly, the inverse of division is going to be multiplication. Now, before we get into how to solve these, let's just remind ourselves a couple of different ways that you might see multiplication and division, right? So, remember, you could have 5a. When a coefficient touches a variable, that means multiplication. You could have 5 parentheses a. Okay, remember when a number is touching a parentheses, that means multiplication. Or you could have something like 5 in parentheses times a in parentheses. That also means multiplication. Something a little bit similar is you might see something like 1/5 a. Okay, now we just learned that we could rearrange this fraction, but right now as it's written, the 1/5 is touching a. Okay, and in between 1/5 and a, there's multiplication. Okay, give you a few more examples of division. Okay, we might see something like a divided by 6. We might see something like a/6. And something else we might see that's kind of similar to this is what if we saw a over 5. Now these, you're looking, you're like, oh, but Miss Declan, I could pull a fraction out of a, right? 1. I could put a 1 in front of a, and I could pull the 1/5 out. So these two, 1/5 a and a over divided by 5, those are very similar. And we'll talk about how you can use either of these to solve a problem. This, you have 1/5 being multiplied by a. Here you have a being divided by 5. Okay, before we start talking about how to solve these problems, what I want us to do is write down some steps. So, on your paper, you're going to write down these steps on your actual, I want you to just write them down right by where it says example 1 on the next page. I'm just going to write them bigger here because we want to have a little bit of room. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video. These steps should look very similar to you. Write these 4 steps down. They are just like the steps we had when we were solving using addition and subtraction. So go ahead and solve the video, and then when you're ready, press play. Okay, we're going to start with example 1. So, our first step should be to draw our line. So I'm going to draw my line down and my equal sign. My next step is going to be to do my do and undo box. So I'm going to go ahead over here and I'm going to say, okay, what's being done and how do I undo it? So right now I'm looking at this and I have 8a equals 24 and I'm asking myself, okay, what right now is happening to this variable a, what's happening between 8 and a, and I know that that is multiplication. So I know right now a is being multiplied by 8. And we just learned that to undo a multiply by 8, we're going to divide by 8. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to divide this side by 8, and I'm using this bar to represent division. Anything I do to the left, I have to do to the right. I'm going to divide by 8. Now this part is a little bit tricky, and I want you to pay attention. On your calculator right now, or in your head, I want you to do 8 divided by 8. Let's simplify this. 8 divided by 8. That gives us 1. Our a is left. A equals 24 divided by 8 is, oh, I'm sorry, that is not 6, it is 3. Now, a lot of us are used to, we cross out the 8s. And we can cross out the 8s, and the reason is 8 divided by 8 is 1, but we don't need 1a, because if the a is by itself, we assume that that 1 is hidden. So we can go ahead and just hide that a again, and we can just have 8 equals 3. A equals 3. So, if you end up, when you divide, and you get 1, that's what you want to get, right? When we were using addition and subtraction to solve equations, we ended up getting 0 when we added or subtracted, and that's what we wanted to get rid of that. When we were multiplying or dividing, we wanted to end up as 1. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that 1 again, and just have a equals 3. Now, one of our most important steps is that we check. So, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to move over to where it says to check. And let's go ahead and check. So, I'm going to rewrite my original equation. 8a equals 24. I just found out that the value of a was 3, so right now I'm going to take this 3 and I'm going to put it in for a. So, 8. Now when I substitute, I want to use parentheses, because I want to tell myself 8 and a right now are being multiplied. I need to remind myself that they're being multiplied. A is 3, so 8 times 3. Let's see if we get 24. 8 times 3 is 24. Because I got 24 on both sides, that means I'm correct, and my answer must be a equals 3. Okay, let's try another example. And for this example, I'm going to solve this problem in 2 ways, right? And this is kind of what we were talking about before in terms of how you can represent a fraction in 2 different ways, and it might mean multiplication or it might mean division. So looking at this first way, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to draw my line down my equal sign, and I'm going to make my do and my undo box. I'm going to ask myself, okay, right now, what's happening to n? Well, I'm looking, and I notice that there's this fraction bar, and that fraction bar means division. So this is saying n divided by 4. So right now, n is being divided by 4. How do you undo divide by 4? You multiply by 4. Remember, the opposite of division is multiplication. So I'm going to times this side by 4. I'm going to times this side by 4. These 4's cancel out, and I'm left with n. And 4 times 9 is 36. So there's one way. Now let's try method number 2. I'm going to make my do and my undo box. Now this time, I'm going to pull a fraction out. Okay, for method 2, I'm going to pull a fraction out. So, remember that when we see a variable by itself, there's a hidden 1 right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw in my hidden 1. And I'm going to pull the fraction out of there. So instead of having 9 equals n over 4, I'm going to have that 9 equals, I'm going to pull 1/4 out as a fraction. So 1/4 n. Now let's ask ourselves, okay, what's happening? Let's make that look more like a 9. Ask ourselves, okay, I have my line down my equal sign. Right now, what's happening to n? Well, right now, 1/4 is touching n. And when 1/4 touches n, that means multiplication. So we are multiplying by 1/4. How do you undo multiply by a fourth? You're going to divide by 1/4. So to undo this, I'm going to divide. Remember that bar means divide. Divide by 1/4. And on the left side, I'm going to divide by 1/4. All right, now, if you want to enter 9 divided by 1/4 on your calculator, you're going to have to put the 1/4 in parentheses. Or you can use your ABC key. So if I do 9 divided by 1/4, I get 36. These 1/4 are going to cancel out, and I'm left with n. Now, notice I just got that n equals 36 both ways. It didn't matter whether I had n divided by 4 and I multiplied both sides by 4, or if I pull the 1/4 out and I divide it by a fourth. Either way, I got n equals 36. Okay, so in this instance, there are 2 ways of solving this problem. Just to be sure, let's go ahead and check our answer. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to rewrite the same problem, the original. I had 9 equals, n over 4. My value of n that I found was 36. So 36 divided by 4. And let's go see if that works. 36 divided by 4 is 9. So my check works. Okay? So think about that as we're moving forward. Right? There's 2 ways of solving this kind of problem. You could get rid of the division, or you could pull out a fraction. All right, let's go ahead and do example number 3. So again, I'm going to draw my line, right? And I'm going to do a do and an undo box. So, okay, right now, what's happening to x? Well, x is being multiplied by -3, so I'm going to times by -3. That's what's happening, times by -3. Notice, I brought this negative sign with, okay? This negative sign came with over here. I brought it with. How do I undo multiply by -3? I'm going to divide by -3. And I want you to write a key point right here because this is important. Okay? The negative comes with. Okay? And what I mean by that is if you're multiplying by -3, you're going to divide by -3. You're going to bring that with. So let's go ahead and let's simplify this one. I'm going to divide by -3. Anything I do to one side, I have to do to the other, so I'm going to divide by -3. My -3's are going to cancel out. I'm left with x equals -15 divided by a -3 is a +5. Okay. We want to make sure that our answer is correct, so we're going to go ahead and check it, and I'm going to move over here. I'm going to rewrite our initial problem. We had -3x equals -15. The value I found for x was 5, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that in for x. So -3. Remember, you want to use parentheses when you put your 5 in because you want to make sure you remind yourself that you're multiplying. -3 times 5. Does that give us -15? -3 times 5 is -15. Okay, our answer works. All right, we have one more example we're going to do. And to do this example, we're going to have to rewrite this problem. It says if n equals -n divided by 4, what is the value of n? Now, some of you are saying, oh, we already did a problem like this, right? Our example number 2 looked a lot like this. This one's a little bit different because there's a negative right here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to zoom in on method 1 to show you that this first method that we're going to use. And we're going to mirror, just so we get it above, what does it look like if we have the fraction, we keep it as n over 4, and what does it look like if we pull the fraction out? So we have 9 is going to be equal to a -9 n over 4. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to draw my line, and I'm going to do my do and my undo box. So right now I'm looking and say, okay, what's happening to n? Well, n is being divided by 4. But what's important here is you notice that in front of that 4, in front of this fraction, there's a negative right here. And we're going to include that negative with a 4. So it's not being divided by 4, it's actually being divided by negative 4. It's being divided by negative 4. We talked previously, if you're dividing by a negative 4, then when you undo that, you need to bring that negative with, okay? You're going to multiply by a negative 4. So in this example, I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 4. So I'm going to times by negative 4 times by negative 4. These negative 4s are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with an n. And negative 4 times 9 is going to give me a negative 36. Okay, so key point here is if you have a negative in front of your fraction, when you try to undo your denominator, we're going to bring that negative with. Okay, let's look at our other method, the other method we used. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rewrite the problem again. We had 9 is equal to negative n over 4. And I'm going to make my do and my undo box. Now, if we wanted to, we could pull our fraction out of this, okay? Just like we did in the example number 2. So I'm going to say, okay, 9 equals, right now I have a negative n over 4. Remember, what's in front of that n that we can't see? There's a hidden 1. So if I wanted to pull a fraction out of this, it would look like negative 1/4 n. Now, what's happening between the negative 1/4 and the n? Well, in between them, when they're touching like that, means multiply. So n is being multiplied by negative 1/4. How do you undo multiply by negative 1/4? You're going to divide by negative 1/4. So on this, I'm going to divide by a negative 1/4. Divide by negative 1/4. Let's see what we get. These negative 1/4 are going to cancel out. I'm going to be left with n. And 9 divided by negative 1/4 is going to give me a negative 36. Alright, I just got the same answer here. That's a good sign. Okay, I probably did something right. But just to be sure, we should check our work. You always want to check your work. It'll make sure that you are correct. So let's rewrite our original problem. We had 9 equals negative n over 4. Okay, now when we do this, we have to use our parentheses. So this is going to look like this. 9 equals negative. On the top, we're going to have a, in parentheses, negative 36. Okay, whenever you're inputting a negative number, put it in parentheses. On the bottom, we'll have our 4. When you put this into your calculator, or when you do this, you need to evaluate your fraction first. So negative 36 divided by 4, that's going to give us a negative 9. Now, technically, this is still by itself, and there's a negative on the outside. When there's a negative on the outside and on the inside, it's kind of like there's a 1 right here. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But a negative 1 times a negative 9 is going to give you a 9. For right now, use your calculator to evaluate this and make sure you put things in parentheses. Okay, you'll have negative, and then in parentheses, a negative 36 divided by 4. We want to evaluate this first, and we'll talk about that when we get to order of operations. So our solution is n equals negative 36, and our 9 equals 9 told us that our solution was correct. Alright, we're going to flip to the next page, and what I want you to do is I want you to try a couple of the U tries. So, I want you to try and do number 1, number 2, these are label the same. So this one, this two. We're going to do these three. So try those three. Now, when you get to something like this one, I want you to show two methods. Two methods on this one. Show me two ways that you could solve a problem like number one. And down here on number 2, I want you to show me two methods that you could use to solve that one. When you come back, I'll have your answers posted. So go ahead and pause the video and try these 3 problems. Alright, here are your answers. You should have had x equals -8, n equals 80, and x equals 7. Now, you should have been able to tell right away whether or not you were correct based on your check, right? You always want to check your answer. That's going to ensure that you are right. If you have questions or there's anything you're unsure of, I want you to circle it, write down a question or where you maybe got stuck. So when you come back to class, you can ask questions and we can work on practicing this objective.